Philip, how are you? How lovely to see you.
Brilliant, and welcome from Zurich. I'm here right in the center, and it's really nice.
I was going to ask you where you were actually because where's your base? Where's your home these days?
Home is Singapore, and due to the hybrid, revolution hybrid, next normal, I'm actually spending blocks of time in Europe and in the US, which very much fits and percolates to the nature of my overall rather global business, which has only become more global really during the pandemic. So.
Super. Listen, I want to dive into understanding all about your expertise and your content and all about your speaking business. But as we started with the fact that you have your bases in Singapore, but you're obviously your background is tell us where you're originally from because you have a slight little accent.
Yeah, I was born in Germany. Kind of grew up as a third culture kid in international school, and actually I went to French-German kindergarten, so really all sorts of languages going on there. And yeah, then sort of chose a path of marketing research. That was my honors, and a bachelor thesis in process management of all things. So the word here is eclectic because my internship experience as a teenager was in architecture practices and design practices. So very much that kind of emulsion of left and right brain. And eventually, I like to think that's, it can become alchemy because it really is about being able to draw on the strategy, the logical, and also the emotive, the personal. And that's really what makes us human, right? Isn't it?
Well, we're going to talk more about what makes us human because I know that you're
Oh, yeah.
passionate about that. We will talk about, but I still want to understand how did you end up in Singapore and why Singapore?
Um, Honestly, it started as an exchange. It was very random, and it was the furthest I could probably go because I studied in Holland in the University of Groningen, which is really interesting, right? You basically come from a very kind of, flat hierarchy university, and I was wondering how is it like in Asia? As it turns out, SMU is the same. It's the very modern progressive model, and that's where I got exposed to design thinking. It's where I furthered my research into consumer behavior and what drives people. And that's pretty much what sticks around really is I'm deeply interested in human behavior and motivation and what makes us who we are and what makes us how we are and the why behind it all.
Fantastic, fantastic. So let's go a little bit deeper into that topic, actually, and I'll come back to your speaking business and how that
Great.
fits with that, because I've known you for years as you've been
Yeah.
talking about trust. In fact, we've sort of considered you a bit of a benevolent vigilante on the topic of trust, and
Love
now
that.
you've shifted to sort of human transformation. What was the catalyst behind that, and how do you define human transformation?
I like to think that I've expanded and focused at the same time. I believe that trust is a very big conceptual, to some people, abstract thing. And my love for demystifying that subject, of course, drove my first book on the trust economy. And it also drove a certain passion for really putting a different perspective on trust and understanding trust from a technology perspective and putting that out there, which I think worked very well. That's how we got to know each other. And you know what? During the pandemic, I thought, hey, this is a global loss of trust. And based on, taking a page out of my own book, literally, I knew that that meant there would be more significant long-term change. None of us saw it coming, but when we were in it, I think some of us felt that this was truly a pivotal point. And so when I noticed that, I came to the so what and the why. Trusting is important because it creates connection and collaboration between people. But what happens when it's not there? And in the pandemic, we realized that all this friction, all this difficulty, traveling from one continent to another, it used to be easy. And then suddenly it became so challenging. And you realize that, well, the reason this is a problem is because it stops us from changing. It stops us from transforming. It stops us from reaching our potential. And it also stops us from solving the problems that, the pandemic has created. Because we are just in gridlock. We are literally and, metaphorically in lockdown. And so that made me think, yeah, trust is important, but trust is kind of like the oat bran. Some people like it, most people know it's good for themselves, but a lot of people say, no, I'd rather like Frosties for breakfast, or donut. And so I realized when it comes to transforming, this is a much more personal topic because all of us, we want to change something about the world and about ourselves. And yes, there is a very close connection here. So I said, hey, why don't we serve people the oat bran donut or, the kale donut, as I used to call it, the kale sour donut. Why don't we give each other what we really want, which is to transform in the way that we would like, to become the best version of ourselves, and to realize the connections between who we are and how we are and why we are, and our environments, our leadership, our organizations, our societies, even our families. The influence that we have is very much created on the inside. And that's why I define as human transformation, that as we are transforming, only then our world is transforming and our organizations are transforming. So we need to do that inner work first. Hey, very much a pandemic topic because we all got confronted with ourselves, right?
Brilliant. And it's interesting because I see the transformation in you as a speaker and the way you're delivering your topic and the way you're explaining this as well. I see that you have transformed incredibly. So I see that you're actually embodying what you're talking about. I love that gridlock. That gridlock is such a good image for me, because actually that really does explain that we are, and the way you've explained it, relating it to trust, that to travel now, there's a total lack of trust. Nobody, are you safe to come in? Can you come into my country? Are you going to bring an infection with you? You're so right. Everything is so much harder, so much harder.
Exactly.
Wow. So what does it look like from a business perspective? If somebody invites you in and when you're going to speak about this human transformation, how do you help businesses to put that into action?
Well, the funny thing is, Maria, that businesses are realizing it themselves already. Like in just the past couple of weeks, right? The thing I keep hearing from business leaders is, hey, it is all about the human in the equation. We have perhaps circumvented it. We have tried to go without it. We have tried to focus on the system, on the process, on everything around it. In the end, you arrive at people. And what better metaphor that is for the pandemic as well, that people are the critical piece. You can do all you want with rules, but it is us who take action, who own a solution that ultimately creates the difference. And right now, what are we facing is, well, it's complexity, extreme complexity. And that's created by distrust. That's created by this gridlock. And this complexity means it puts people in this fear paralysis, deer in the headlights. I like the metaphor of a car. There's no one on the driver's seat. There is a brake on the gas, and people are frantically stepping on the brake, and nobody's on the steering wheel. That's your typical modern organization. People are frustrated, and then you wonder why this is burning so much resources, right? So now you come to this point of, hey, we would love to trust, we would love to take the foot off the brake, but then who is steering? And how do we manage that? We aren't ready for that anymore because we're constantly just protecting the past instead of participating in the future. That's kind of how most organizations are stuck. So yes, intellectually they understand trust, but on an emotional level, they're like, this is not going to be possible. And so I thought, why talk about something that people think is not possible when instead I can talk about something that we all know is possible. We know we can transform. We know that certain things can make us transform. And watching a video about a marathon or watching a sort of video explaining you how to run a marathon or reading books about it is not going to make you a marathon runner. So whatever you want to talk about, right, you do have to do the work and you do have to walk the talk. The best way to do this nowadays is to think, well, why are we stuck? Why is distrust still prevalent if we all know very well that trust is the better option? Why is distrust still there? Well, maybe it's in the people. Maybe it's the fact that people don't want to trust others because they don't trust themselves. Maybe they don't think others will trust them. There is that conflict which we need to resolve. And that, I think, is what human transformation is about. I'm noticing that people are welcoming this with open arms. With trust, I had to wear my kind of, virtual professor hat and say, well, this is the evidence. This is why it matters. Intellectually, people got it. With human transformation, you notice this awesome opening up. People are just opening up because that's what they were looking for. They want to hear about it. They want to know how to transform because we all see these people in our lives where some people get it right, some people get it wrong. Some people get it exceptionally right and they just thrive. They become super happy. I noticed one person that I sat on a round table with many years ago. He used to work for a big telco. And then he started a startup that helps seniors hear better. It's a technology data company. And I met him half a year later and it was a completely different person. He was glowing. And so we see that, we experience it now as we're experiencing this great reshuffle, the great reset, whatever you want to call it. We're noticing that some people are transforming and we all want to be part of that. And I think that's really the heart of it. And that's where the motivation is. That's where people are signing up and saying, yes, I want that.
Yeah.
And that's completely different in my experience of how this is being received.
I get that. I think we're all in a place to hear it now. I think, having gone through what we've gone through the last 18 months, 2 years, we're all here thinking, actually, we can't go back to the old normal. We need to create a better new normal. I think that's great. I love that you called it the reshuffle, which is quite a good term. But your book, actually, latest book is called Reset, and a lot of people have talked
Yes.
about the Great Reset. In the Reset, you talk about the fact that what got us to where we are now isn't going to get us to where we need to be, which makes sense really, because we don't want to be where we are now. Let's be honest, we want to be somewhere better. So where exactly do we need to be, and how do we get there? Huge question for you, Philip. Huge.
Where do we need to be? Let's start with where we are, Maria. The pandemic revealed what I like to call a distrust epidemic. Slowing down productivity growth, which was juxtaposed with the exponential productivity increase in technology. That huge disconnect is also dissonance. And then we have a trust economy, people, quickly getting to know each other, trusting fast, enabled by data in the trust economy, mostly purported by my generation and the Gen Zs, right? And at the same time, we have the distrust economy, which is gridlocked, is paradoxically getting slower and slower. It's basically a world in which data is maybe a secondment, but its sort of decision is still made based on the bureaucracy, the system. Because, well, historically, we didn't have the data. We didn't have the technology to trust at speed. Everything is slower. So there is this disconnect, over-trusting, under-trusting. And I think we need to release that. Why? Well, because, we have focused our society on competition, on zero-sum games, sometimes even negative-sum games, politicizing, sabotaging each other, elbowing our way through. And frankly, obviously, it doesn't make anyone happy, because if someone's losing, then it's not really a success, is it? So the message in Reset isn't about the great reset or the small reset or the medium-sized reset. It's about simply focusing on what made humanity great, which is collaboration on the basis of shared visions, imaginations of the future. Yes, we need trust for that, but we also need to agree on what the future brings. We all want to be happy. We all want to be content and safe. So the truth is, we all want the same things. And we have to respect that each of us has a unique way of getting there. So trying to control the process of how we enter the future is futile, because we're all individuals and each of us has a unique journey. You cannot press every person through the same process and expect the same result. It's like trying to make paper clips, right? You put in metal, you get paper clips. If one day you put in raspberries or bananas, you're still going to get paper clips. Well, obviously not, because humans are unique. If you push them through the same process, the outcome will be random. And so I advocate for outcome focus. We all want the same things as humans. And we've got to accept that we all have a unique path to get there. And so we need to trust that we have the answers to that path. Not some guru, not some sort of expert alone, but we have the answers to that path. We're open to suggestion, but we define that path. And every one of our paths is going to be different, because every one of us is different. So I'm going to answer the question with a framework in that sense, is that we must focus on the outcome, and we must trust that we will, by focusing on the outcome, all arrive in the same destination, albeit with different journeys.
That's really interesting. I have got this hankering now for a banana and some raspberries, but that is really, which means I'm going to
Smoothie,
remember that
perhaps?
story. Yeah, smoothie. I'm going to remember that story. That's going to stick with me. That's very good. I like that. That's really interesting. Really interesting. So let's talk about your journey, because you've been on a journey the last 18 months yourself. You've been on a journey longer.
Yes.
Since I've known you longer than that. And I've seen an incredible transformation. So tell me about how your journey has evolved, and tell me also how your speaking business has evolved alongside that journey.
Right. I think that by the end of 2019, traveling almost 300 days a year, I was very much on autopilot. And that's okay from a functional perspective. You get on stage, you do your thing, fun, it's engaging, it's great. At the same time, I actually noticed that autopilots mean that you're not in control. You're just automatically driving. And so if you want to take back control, right, what better opportunity than to be locked in a room or locked in an apartment for an extended period of time? You get fully confronted with yourself. And so for me, I found this quite funny, right? We talk about being busy and not having enough time and, this being a high stakes game, which very much it is. But we very rarely talk about our role in all of this, the human part in us as speakers. Because let's face it, that's why we're on stage. We're on stage because we're interesting humans, not because we're experts, not because we have interesting stories to tell, but because of the humans that we are. Because people trust that we're going to get the results that people, as the event, that the audience, that the event management, that the people who are supporting us in this, that they want. So what does this have to do with me? Well, it's actually really simple. We like to say things like we don't have time, and let's not forget that we spend a lot of time during the day sleeping, a lot of time during the day procrastinating, thinking all sorts of thoughts, or being less productive than we think. We're not productive the same every single hour of the day. So I realized, well, maybe I just hadn't been taking time for myself because I was on autopilot. And so I started taking time for myself. I took 30 minutes for myself. And it was uncomfortable because we're a bit like an iceberg, 10% above the surface. You can look down under the water. You see maybe the remaining 10%, but the 80% are completely hidden. Well, our minds are like that. The 80% is unfortunately what's driving the critical mass of our lives. And in the 10%, that's where we cognitively exist, right? Aware existence. But it's the implicit, the unaware that actually drives who we are. That's the autopilot. So in education, right, and in speaking as well, we like to push things, force-feed things downwards into the top part, the 10%, and we hope that it sort of becomes part of people's existence. And yet that very rarely happens at scale, and very rarely happens sustainably. Ask someone what they remember after 6 months, right? Maybe a few things. So instead, you can think of this iceberg having a membrane, the water surface. And I realized that you have to open that membrane. You actually have to change a few gears, a few levers in the bottom part of the iceberg. And you have to do that in your audience. You also have to do it in yourself. You have to allow things to surface. And you have to accept that actually you as a person are pretty wise. It's not the things that you didn't know you knew that change you. It's the things that you didn't know that you actually had in you. It's the things that you didn't know that you had part of yourself. That's because we're only aware of a very small part. I became aware of that I was only aware of a very narrow aspect of my life because I was on autopilot. I was only deliberately making decisions in a very small part of my life. And so the conclusion I drew was that I had to connect the top and the bottom of the iceberg. I had to create an exchange, and I had to face whatever would surface. And the things that surfaced were interesting. They were things worth resolving and working on. Some of those things went very far back. Some of the things were recent, and I embraced that. And it turned into 60 minutes a day. I call it meditating. Some call it, time for self. Some call it reflecting. It doesn't matter what you call it. But what happened is, for me, I was this cooled down, frozen lava lamp. Little part was functioning. There was a huge autopilot. There was no connection, no communication within the self. And what happened is that lava lamp started waking up, and it started kind of mixing, and everything started kind of, cross-pollinating. I started realizing that I knew things that I didn't know I knew. I started realizing that I was capable of doing this, and I was capable of using what I did on stage in completely different parts of life, that things were starting to kind of, distribute across my entire reality. And I started yearning for that personal time because I noticed that the hour I take now every day, it gives me back more than 1 hour in my day. I'm noticing this in myself. I'm, much more calm. I'm much more at peace. I have completely different thoughts. I have much more diverse thoughts. At the same time, the thoughts fit much better into a bigger picture. When I'm on stage and things are going differently, because they're always going a little differently, right? Events are always a bit unpredictable. I'm flowing much more. I'm much more certain in the delivery that I give. I can do a 9.9 out of 10 every time. Beforehand, I was like, let's aim for a 9.9. Sometimes it's an 8.8, sometimes it's a 9.5, sometimes it's a 10, but it was completely unpredictable. Now I have that certainty that it's going to work. You notice that in yourself. Everything changes. The way you think about other people changes. You are bothered by less things. I am vastly more patient. I was traveling so much that, I wasn't patient. I wasn't even patient if there was one person in front of me with checking in. I was like, oh God, everything's changed because I'm connecting the dots and I'm trusting that I have the answers.
That's amazing. The change in you is incredible. I've seen it because I knew you in 2019 when you were running around doing
Oh
300
yeah.
gigs. And when you
Oh
were
yeah.
that person, the energy you have is totally different. And it's sort of, it's like a maturity, that certainty. It's a maturity, it's sort of like a wisdom. It's
Well, I
really,
did turn 30, Maria, so
oh
that
gosh,
does
you're
make a
so
difference,
old.
right?
You're so old, Philip. It's just terrible. Tell me how it's manifested itself though, because you were doing 300 gigs a year, which is not a small amount. What are the numbers now in terms of your speaking? Have you reduced that number?
It was 300 days of travel, Maria. I think if I had done 300 gigs a year, I
Oh,
would have
right,
probably
sorry.
been dead by now. I appreciate the trust you have in me. It was intense. Now it's actually picking up very nicely after the pandemic. And the thing is that now what I'm noticing is that I'm doing a lot more long-term work because people are realizing transformation, it may not be a 10-year plan, but transformation takes more than perhaps an hour, right? It's something that it's something we commit to. It's something we must lean into. And of course, for that, what I'm doing is making it as simple and easy as possible. And of course, empowering everyone to realize that, hey, we have the answers. You don't have to think that, oh, some people can do it, other people cannot. No, you have them in you. So I'm not the one telling you how to. I'm just giving you access to that. I'm excavating it like an archaeologist because it's there, it's in you. That agility, that ability, it's in you, that innovativeness, even that creativity, it is very much in you. More importantly, though, the capability to adapt, transform, and most importantly, proact, to just go out and do something and own it, that's in you. So I'm noticing that, yeah, most companies are realizing this is important. So I'm doing more leadership transformation programs. I'm doing moderating nowadays, which I love because I love connecting the dots. So I'll be doing like a keynote and a moderation. I also noticed that since about early this year, I decided very radically to go back, in fact, not back, just to increase my fee and to increase it consistently. To go back to one global fee and one virtual global fee. And that fee isn't 80% of what it used to be. That fee is the fee.
Yeah.
And people accept it because, to me, this is like, you can think of it as like an entry level. It's like when you get in a London cab, right? You pay a fixed entry level fare. And then if you go to the airport, it's going to be more than if you just get out after 5 minutes. The entry fare is the same. If you go to the taxi driver and say, can you kind of maybe like halve the entry fare? They're like, no, right? This is the model. And I think it's fair because when you calibrate towards a client, right, there is work involved. And I love being really personal, really relational in this. So to me, I'll gladly do more. I'll gladly do the same keynote twice. I'll gladly accommodate you as a client because you're accommodating me. You're respecting me and you're respecting the value that I bring.
Love that. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So, listen, to finish, Philip, because we could talk all day actually, because it's fascinating.
Good,
I
yeah.
love this new topic and this new positioning. Um, you know, we pride ourselves on giving practical, actionable advice. So
Yep.
I would love you to give us something that could help our listeners. Perhaps they need to make a transformational journey with regards to their speaking business, or maybe they need to change their topic, or maybe they need to change their lives. Can you give them something practical that they can do? Is that too much
Yep.
to ask?
There
You can.
is, oh, it's actually great. And these will be very potent tips. So you can use them wisely. There are three things. The first thing is that whatever introspection you do, when you take yourself the time, you win it back 10 times because that interplay of your different parts of the iceberg, that's what creates resounding clarity. And it made me understand why I was kind of being slightly uncomfortable with this idea of just sticking with trust. It made me think, what is my end game? And where do I want to go with my speaking business? And that means now I am vastly more motivated to do it, vastly more excited, and it's just so much more fun. And no stress? Well, there's always a bit of stress, but that's normal. I can deal with it now. It's like you're super compensating in a way because you give yourself that time for things to just connect, and the clarity gives you so much more firepower. So that's one. Take that time and use it wisely. How do you do this? Well, here's a simple exercise. You take some time in your day, it can be 5 minutes if you want. You think about a situation in recent time where things went really well. You were flowing. Everything was great. You ask yourself 3 questions. Question number 1, how is time passing? Fast, slow, medium? Second question, where do I feel myself in my body? Head, belly, heart? Maybe I don't feel myself at all. Third question, focus. Where am I focusing? Internally? Externally? Maybe a mix? Why are we asking these questions? Well, you'll find out now. You do that, you remove yourself from that situation. You can even go to another chair or sit on the sofa or change the scenery. Now you go to a bad situation where you were stuck recently. Something didn't go well. Something was really challenging and you were, maybe you wanted to say something and you couldn't find the right words. Something was stuck, something was wrong. You ask yourself the same questions. How is time passing? Where do I feel myself in my body? And where am I focusing, externally or internally? Now, if you're one of those overachievers that wants to have a bonus, the extended, version, you do a third step. You then remove yourself from that, you go back to your previous position, you go back into that good situation, and then you imagine from that good situation remaining there, you're going to look upon yourself in that bad situation. And you're going to give yourself the time to give yourself some advice. And you know what? When you trust that process, after a few minutes perhaps, some things will come up through the membrane. Some words, some ideas, maybe some pictures, some metaphors, whatever it is, sentences, emotions, something will come up. And maybe you'll have a nice word, something crisp that's going to come up right there. Or maybe in the shower, an hour later, something will come to your mind. Or maybe the next morning, or in your dreams. When you do that, let me say this, it works. You will completely rediscover yourself. That's the first thing, That's really introspecting. This is how you do it. The second thing is just as important, is actually taking the external perspective. Why do you speak about what you speak about? What is the true reason? Our brain is super creative in finding meaning in what we do, even if we're not aware of it. Example, I was speaking to a journalist and she told me, my parents never listened to me and they never really gave me room to explore myself as a child. Do you think it's a surprise that she became a journalist? No, right? Think about what is between the lines, the reason why you're doing what you're doing. And when you have that, it amplifies your reflection. Because that is the sort of external perspective. Why would somebody, make sense of that? How would an external make sense of why you do what you do? That gives you extreme, thrust forward, because maybe sometimes you didn't even realize that it was there. It was just there all along. And the last thing, the third thing is thinking about the fact that all of us as people want to go in the same direction. There's 3 games in the world to play. There is stealing games, which I call numbing games. This is where you sabotage others to look great. Avoid them at all costs because they make you miserable too. Then there is the dealing games. Most of us play these a lot of the time. Win, lose, competing, positioning yourself against other speakers, getting ahead of others. Well, the thing is, someone's losing in this. So clearly, we're hardly building, the wonderful world that we talk about that way. Finally, there are purposeful games, infinite games, healing games. Ask yourself, how can you focus on representing those healing games? How can you be embracing the fact that there are opportunities for win-win situations, that you can work with others, you can collaborate instead of compete? Because the more you think about that, guess what? That's going to make you way happier than dealing. Dealing is about stress. It's about competition. Sometimes it can be fun, sometimes it can be stressful, and usually it's not fun for the person losing. With healing games, you actually have an impact on others. And that impact is not about positioning yourself for future gigs. It's about making a genuine difference. Because guess what? When you do right by others, what will happen? Right,
Yeah, fantastic. When you do good to others, it comes back to you, doesn't it? So the introspection is number 1, understanding why is number 2, and I'm summing it up in my own words here. And number 3 is the healing games, the collaboration. And do you know what I loved? When you were talking me through that introspection piece, I actually took myself to, when things were going well. You noticed, did you? And I know where it is in my body. I know exactly where I focus. And I took myself to, and the difference where that was
right?
That was really powerful for me. Thank you for that. The second point about the why, I've done some work on, so that was really useful. But also this healing thing, I do love. You're so right about the stealing and the dealing. That was just a masterclass in an answer. Philip, I cannot thank you enough. That was wonderful. I'm going to go and work on myself and do a bit of introspection. Have a wonderful rest of the day. I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Time flew by, and I think this is really wonderful. Like, great speaking to you, speaking through you here again, and I'm certain that this, will be opening up some horizons for the viewers as well, the listeners as well. Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
You're welcome. And thank you everybody for listening to Speaking Business Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please give it a rating on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends, share it. And until next time, I've been Maria Franzoni. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.